Thank you so much for joining us. Projects to products. I think it's one of those discussions which perhaps we don't discuss often enough at the studio. It can be very top level given the audience we have, but sometimes really important to look at the specifics too. Before we get into the nuts and bolts though, let's jump into who you are. Elizabeth, why don't you start first? Name, role, company.
Sure. So Elizabeth Akarita, I'm effectively a Group Deputy Chief Information Officer within central government. So I look after a shared technology service within 2 ministerial bits of gov, which is somewhat unusual. Usually 1 ministerial bit of gov that reports into a Secretary of State has 1 tech team, but we share services because it's better taxpayer value. A relatively small team that punches above our weight, that looks after almost 20,000 people across about 13 organisations, internal and external facing digital services as well.
Wonderful. Thanks, Elizabeth. Joanna.
Joanna Pamphilis from UniCredit. I'm the CDIO responsible for the wealth management and private banking area, so head of investments and securities, digital product and services for our clients.
And thank you for coming from Italy for this.
Yes.
Wow. Andy came from Manchester.
Oh.
Not as far. Andy Birds from ThoughtWorks, one of our product experts working in customer experience products and design. ThoughtWorks is a global software development company, do consulting, generally working with large enterprise organizations, helping them transform. Yeah, serial transform.
So this whole topic today, we're looking at the shift from projects to products. What does that shift look like at all of your respective organizations? Elizabeth, why don't you go first as you went first last?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So this reflects the journey that my organisations have been on. So when I first joined in 2019, I would say that things tended to be quite waterfall, quite traditional ways of delivering things. But the world moves on and there's been a push from the centre. So in central government, a lot of what we do and how we do it is governed by the Cabinet Office, Central Digital Data Office and Government Digital Services. And they have a set of standards that we work to, that they've really been pushing through in recent years to get us to work in a more product-centric way. And practically what that looks like for us is not only upskilling and empowering people to work in the way that we would like, but it involves putting our money where our mouth is. So if we're saying we want people to work in a particular way, funding people and how they work versus funding kind of projects and things.
Okay, and we'll get on later on in the conversation to some of the challenges perhaps, but what are the benefits? You've mentioned a couple of in the abstract way, but have you tangible benefits that you've seen since you've joined?
Yeah, so just kind of to set the scene a little bit, I'll give a real kind of practical example. So I joined November of 2019 and had a remit of building up our organisation's first ever user-centred design agile team. We'd only ever had kind of project management professionals before that. I was able to scale up the team reasonably within an order of weeks. And then obviously March 2020, COVID hit, lockdown hit. And because the nature of being in central government, that means that we needed to build a number of really punchy services that had to go live very, very quickly, much more quickly than we could have moved if we were still doing waterfall or just kind of traditional project management. We were able to spin up some COVID response services within days or weeks versus what could have been months or years in the kind of old style. And that was thanks to a team that I helped to embed and then roll forward about a year or two later when the energy crisis hit and war in Ukraine, etc. There was just a need to cut through the old ways of working and do something new. And that wouldn't have been possible unless I'd embedded those ways of working.
Interesting, thanks. Joanna, international organisation, different sector, private sector, of course. What comparisons can you draw from Elizabeth and also what contrasts perhaps can you draw to?
I would say at UniCredit, we are in the process of transitioning or shifting, right, from projects to products. And I say that because it's really a mindset shift. It's also a skill set shift, and it's not an IT only topic, right? So when you look at an organization across 13 European countries, when you look at an organization with 75,000 people, it's a big shift. So some of what we do is taking the incremental steps, right? But a product-driven organization is an organization that is basically working towards a vision, right? So it's not an engineering led organization where you've got IT for IT's sake, where they're developing solutions in search of problems. And it's not a sales-led organization where you're developing product for your customers because you're chasing revenues, right? So this is basically saying we want to have the best mobile banking app in Europe. We want to have, the best instant lending product, in Europe or in Italy or whatever the topic is, right? With, certain KPIs, certain, measurable, goals and targets. So this is, for a traditional bank, also kind of a way to begin to pivot towards competing, if you will, with fintech organizations. So the elements of agile, the elements of smaller teams, focus teams, teams that have end-to-end delivery. So really kind of breaking down to have that agile view. And also the mindset, I would reinforce that, because the mindset is about, instead of a project manager or a project-led view where you're looking at a specific start and end, you're all about the budgeting, the resourcing, delivery, and then you're done. It's kind of a transaction. From a product view standpoint, you're not focused on delivering those features. You're focused on the vision of the product, right? And you have that end-to-end mindset and ownership. So it's a pretty big change. So some similarities, but maybe some differences in terms of, being a bank versus the organization you're a part of.
Yeah.
Andy, you were nodding your head vigorously.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of it resonates with me. We've transformed internally, dog food or drinking your own champagne. We've been doing that with ThoughtWorks over the years, but I work with a lot of enterprise organizations, thousands, 100,000 employees, all different verticals, and I hear a lot of these similar things. Customer-centric, focusing on the user, what are their needs, what are the problems, what you're trying to solve. Being tech-enabled, so rather than being like a service or inhibitor, how does it accelerate? And then outcome-led, what's the goal, the vision that you're trying to train towards? But it's all about being responsive, delivering value quicker. Right. And it's become really popular and well-known now because of the success of the FANGs, the Facebooks, Amazon, Netflix, and Googles, and everyone's trying to emulate their success.
And we're calling it a business shift. I mean, this kind of business shift, is it industry-wide? Are there elements that you think are important as caveats to share with the audience when we're thinking about projects to products?
Why are the things that are important? Well, it's about being responsive, delivering value quicker. I guess product transformation has been more common the last 4 or 5 years. Typically, we would be asked by companies like private equity companies or investors that have recently acquired a company and want to flip the company and sell it. And that's because they know that if a company can be more responsive, deliver value to customers, they're going to get a higher market valuation.
Sure.
So that's a key reason.
Yeah.
I would say also it's a much more active strategy, right? So you think about a project, you think about all the overhead, like I said, resourcing, budgeting, administrating, controlling, monitoring. And it's not that you don't do those in a product organization, but you're focused on, again, you're not focused on, I have this set of features I need to deliver with this budget, right? You're focused on, I have a vision, right? And moving that vision forward. And then also, I think it's active because you're interacting with customers. So typically you're developing a minimum viable product, you're road testing it, and then you're iterating. And so you see the immediate feedback. So you have that energy as well and that connection. And for people in IT or technology, I think that connection energizes. I think it gives meaning and context more than a stagnant traditional project.
Well, my next question then is really for the audience who perhaps are on different parts of that journey then, what would you warn them about with this shift? What are some of the unforeseen things that you are now very conscious about? Elizabeth, why don't you go first on that one?
So it can be tricky because it's probably not going to be overnight, because what you're really talking about is how people solve problems, going back to that kind of human-centered part. You're talking about how people communicate and solve problems in a business context to drive towards a particular product vision or goal. And for me, it's a case of honestly follow the money. So an old director of mine said something to the tune of, if you have a particular goal, if you want to know what an organization really cares about, if they are saying they want to be product focused, don't ask to see their strategy or their vision statement, ask to see their budget, because whatever it is that you're doing, you need to give something, you need to give it the proper people, time, money, skills in order to get from one way of working to another. And you also need to think about how you're going to democratize a lot of those skills throughout the business. So a lot of what we're talking about really shouldn't just be concentrated within the tech team, because it really isn't going to add a lot of business value to just have that product-centric mindset within the tech team. So one of the ways that we do that is we have our multidisciplinary teams. We have tech people working with non-tech people and imparting those ways of working. And we do find that, the proof is in the pudding, it works, and people do tend to take those ways of working back out into the business, which is nice.
Really interesting, because that connects with the previous panel in Studio One, where we looked at interdisciplinary teams and how networks can be utilised well in this context. I mean, that seems perhaps obvious, but it's very difficult when you're in the thick of things, working on even just different products, to actually connect those different expertise together. Would that, Joanna, be something you're going through right now, given you're sort of early on in the journey than Elizabeth?
I was thinking about the question you posed to Elizabeth, and my response, if you were going to ask me, was, it's hard, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it, because it's such a different way of working. And when we first started this journey a few years ago, you have to find people across, so business, marketing, finance, your multidisciplinary teams. You have to find people that are willing, they want to try, they're open-minded, because, everyone's watching like the first few experiments on this, right? So coming back to why it's so hard, it's a change. I mean, so, inherently people have a low resistance to change. It's another trend. It's another, this too shall pass, right? So for my experience, when we launched the first set of digital first customer-centered products for our corporate customers, having a business sponsor that served as a product owner, that was game, he was up for it. Really, right? So you've got to have somebody on the IT side, somebody on the business side, and then the team follows.
Andy, is it a trend?
Moving to products? Absolutely. I mean, I would say it has been a big trend. There's been a lot of noise in the market, a lot of books written around having product-led growth as a go-to-sales motion, having product-centric or product first. So yeah, it's a big trend in the industry. You've seen a rise of the chief product officer. Lots of organizations start to have a chief product officer. So about 15% they estimate, and they estimate the next 5 years to move to 75% of the FTSE 500. So
another C role.
Yeah, another C role. And then there's questions about, where do they report into? How does it work? Do you have a chief product and technology officer?
Great. I think that's a really good question.
Yeah.
In your mindset, when we're thinking about this business shift product, who owns that shift then? Please go ahead, any of you.
I think the whole executive have got to be bought in, because it's about cross-functional collaboration, multidisciplinary teams. So you need to have the chief executive officer on board, absolutely. It's got to be top table discussion. Okay. It's not just about having the CTO or the CIO. And if you have got a CPO, obviously you do need to have
also
more.
not sure how much stuff the CIO and CTO can take on.
Yeah, much more. Yeah. But it's a bit different where, 10 years ago, there was the agile transformations and people are using the Spotify, not Spotify model. And it was generally the conversation with a CIO or a CTO, and it was about having delivery squads or IT squads, and IT being as a service for the business. Yeah. But this is about breaking down those barriers, breaking down those functional silos, and actually trying to have cross-functional teams that own outcomes rather than outputs. So not a project deliverable. Trying to meet a goal for the business and for their customers and users.
I think it's that.
Oh, sorry, go.
No, please.
Yeah. So I think the point that we're kind of making here is that any kind of tech change is really just change management. We can call it transformation, we can call it innovation or whatever we want, but it's change management by another name.
Yep.
And if you want to change a thing, you need I totally agree with your point, you need the entire business on board, because you can't, there's that stereotype of the tech team in a corner in a darkened room trying to do a thing, a whizzy jolly thing, in the corner. But you really need the entire exco on board, and then technology needs to be an underpinning layer across a wider business change across the entire business.
Yeah, I was going to add in, I think the business absolutely needs to kind of drive this product strategy view because it's such a fundamental shift. Impacts your revenues. It impacts, how you look at customer engagement, customer retention, customer churn. It cannot be an IT trend. It cannot be something that IT is driving. At least this is my view. IT is enabler. They're part of the Fusion team, but it really needs to be driven from the business.
I suppose what I'm curious by is this a linear trend or a pendulum trend? I.e., is this something that continues and changes and evolves, or is this something that in 5 years' time will go back to projects because actually the project view is perhaps different? A controversial opinion, and I've put that out there on purpose. But my final question to you all then is, now you're establishing these kind of remits and these changes to the methodology, the structure and everything, what do you hope then to actually get out from your team's perspective? You mentioned mindset, Joanna. We talk about or think about bottom line, we think about productivity and efficiency and innovation. Is this also generally better for the workforce too?
There's pros and cons, I think. I think you're going to get higher employee engagement. So you generally get, if you're doing ENPS or looking at employee experience, you generally get the higher morale. But it's a lot more accountability because they're accountable for outcomes and goals. And you want to have a check-in with them monthly and quarterly, and they may miss that. Whereas it's much easier to deliver an output or hit a milestone. Having an outcome where there's more uncertainty is a lot more challenging. So it can be more challenging for employees, I think.
I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't predict. Not that anyone would have predicted the explosion of Gen AI, right, for example. But I think, when I think about products, I think about, like I said, small focus teams, fusion teams. I think about, products kind of transcending the organization, right? So you kind of break down silos. I also think about it gives more context to Agile. It gives more context to focus on the customer. So will it go away? Will we swing back to projects? Maybe it's more of a hybrid because not everything is product orientation per se, right? Regulatory, CSDR or ECMS or Target 2. I mean, you can't set a product-driven topic for delivery. So probably some kind of hybrid. But I would also think at least for people within the organization, you want to be connected to the customer, right? And know that as human beings, we fundamentally want to have purpose and value. We want to kind of feel that connection. So the work we're doing, if it's product oriented, kind of gives you that more than you're in a long-term project, administering, managing resources, budgeting, et cetera. At least that's my view, without a crystal ball.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be inclined to agree with that. So I think it's one of those things where if we're talking about will people go back from product back to project, I think it's one of those things where if the organization is kind of really under fire, they kind of revert to type. So I think you can really see if an organization is maybe struggling with its sales or if something is going on kind of financially, it's in the decline. People culturally and in terms of ways of working do tend to just revert back to what they know and kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit. But I will say that within Central Gov, we have quite a similar philosophy to you, which is keeping a focus on who is the end user, what is the problem that we're solving. We're working together to solve a very specific problem in a very specific way to help the citizen and give the taxpayer the maximum value. And we choose to work in a product-centric mindset, not only because it's is defined by the Cabinet Office, but it lets us build things with the least wasted, with the least risk, but with some good governance around it that ensures we're building the right things for the right people in the right place. Because your mileage may vary, but sometimes with kind of more waterfall ways of working, you start building a thing and you realise a couple of million quid in that you've built the wrong thing in the wrong place for the wrong people.
I think I'm going to pause the conversation now. I think this conversation could evolve quite quickly. Andy, do you have any final thoughts on what we've heard this afternoon?
I was only going to add to that controversial point, actually, that if the requirements are known, so you might be in catch-up mode, you're behind as an organisation, and you can be more specific, and you don't have to be as innovative, then projects are great. So if you're responding to regulatory change or legal, or you're doing a migration and you want to have feature parity, then projects are absolutely perfect for that. So it's about where you are. So yeah, it's not always about products, but it's about having that product mindset and having products as a default rather than projects. So
What I really hope then is maybe in 6 to 12 months' time, we reconvene and we revisit these answers, because to your point, it is hard.
It is.
And you do get change fatigue, and there are different hybrid situations where different methodologies are better than others. So yeah, very interested to hear your thoughts in 6 to 12 months' time. But thank you very much for your answers this afternoon and for your time too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.